The sky above Zerthia's capital burned a soft shade of red as Jake Monroe's ship landed quietly near the Grand Court. Alien guards in shining black armor stood around the landing platform, their 4 eyes watching every move. They had never seen a human before, not this close. Not without chains, whispers passed between them in clicks and growls, but Jake understood none of it. He stepped out slowly, his boots touching the warm silver tiles of the royal ground. He wore no armor, no weapons, only a plain, earth-made jacket. With a patch on the sleeve, United Peace Corps. His dark brown eyes scanned the massive palace ahead, tall towers glowing with blue lights, banners of war symbols waving above. But Jake didn't flinch. A sharp voice called out, "Stay where you are, human." It came from a tall alien soldier, his skin dark like obsidian and his fangs half bared. Jake nodded politely. "Of course," he said calmly. Raising his hands just slightly to show peace, from behind the guards, a floating chair hovered forward, and on it sat the alien king. Of Zerthia, the king's crown was made of bone and metal, and his gaze was cold, heavy. "This is the human Earth sent to stop a civil war," he growled. Some members of the court laughed, others looked insulted, but Jake didn't speak yet. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small cube, the data crystal. The guards stepped forward, ready to strike, thinking it was a weapon. But the king raised a hand, and they froze. "Let him show us," the king said quietly. Jake placed the cube on the floor, pressed its center, and stepped back. A glowing light rose from the device, forming holograms in the air. The images showed Earth's past cities burning in nuclear fire, children screaming under falling skies, soldiers dragging their wounded friends through mud and blood. Every alien eye in the court widened. "This is what war did to my people," Jake said, his voice steady. "We killed each other over pride, over lies, over fear." He looked directly at the king. "Your people are about to do the same." The air in the throne room turned still. Even the guards stopped breathing. One of the elder nobles stood and shouted, "You dare show us horror as a lesson?" Jake turned toward him slowly. "I show you truth," he answered. A younger alien woman, wearing a guard's uniform, stepped closer to Jake's side. Her eyes were softer, thoughtful. "You came alone?" she asked in a low voice. "Yes," Jake said. "I came to stop a war, not to start one." The king stared at the images still floating on Earth City, turning to ash. He had seen war, but never like this. After a long silence, he stood from his throne, and the court gasped. "We will hear more," the king said finally. "But understand, human, many here want blood, not peace." Jake nodded. "I've heard that before," he said. "But peace always begins with someone willing to stand alone." The king motioned for Jake to be escorted to a chamber. "Let the humans speak to both clans tomorrow," he ordered. "We will see if his words are stronger than our rage." As Jake followed the guard out, he could still feel many eyes burning into his back, some filled with hate, some with curiosity, and maybe one or two with hope. He was just one man on a planet full of warriors and warlords, but deep down he believed this was the place where something could change. And far above, in a secret tower of the palace, someone watched him through a screen. A shadowed figure whispered, "If this human speaks tomorrow, our plans may fail." Another voice answered, "Then he must not live through the night." That night, the halls of the alien palace echoed with silence. But danger moved like smoke through the dark. Jake sat alone in his guest chamber, watching the lights of the city flicker through a glass wall. The data crystal sat quietly on the table beside him, now dim, its message already delivered once, but not enough. He knew it had to be more than just horror. It had to be truth. Outside, guards walked past his door, speaking in soft clicks. They seemed calm. But Jake had seen it in their eyes earlier, fear mixed with pride. He couldn't sleep, not in a place where he wasn't sure if he was a guest or a prisoner. His instincts from Earth told him something was coming, and it did. The door opened. Without warning, no knock, no code, a figure in shadow rushed in silent, fast, armed. Jake barely had time to roll off the bed, a blade slicing through the air where his neck had been. He grabbed the metal chair and swung it blindly, crashing it into the figure's chest. They both stumbled. Jake lunged for the wall panel and slammed his hand on the emergency beacon, but nothing happened. The panel had been disabled. The figure attacked again, but this time the door burst open behind them. Blinding green light flooded the room, and 2 alien guards charged in, followed by Hertha, young female guard from earlier. Her name was Vera, and she didn't hesitate. With one sharp command, the attacker was disarmed. Pinned to the wall and unmasked, Jake stared, breathing hard. It wasn't a rebel. It wasn't a soldier. It was a royal court member, wearing the king's own crest on their armor. Vera's face went cold. "This came from high up," she whispered. "Maybe even from someone close to the throne." Jake wiped the sweat from his brow and picked up the fallen weapon. "So much for peace," he muttered. Later, in a hidden chamber deep beneath the palace, Vera and Jake stood in front of a new device. A second data crystal, this one locked. With Earth's strongest encryption, Jake loaded it into the projector, and once more, images filled the air. But this time, it wasn't just war. It was healing, rebuilding humans who once fought. Now working together to rebuild broken cities, former enemies hugging over graves, children learning side by side in schools with no flags. Vera watched with wide eyes. This is what comes after peace?" she asked softly. Jake nodded. "It's not easy, but it's possible." They had one chance left tomorrow's speech in front of both clans. Jake wasn't just going to warn them. He was going to show them a future worth choosing, but elsewhere. In the highest tower of the palace, a new plan was already being made. The failed assassin knelt before a robed figure. Their head bowed low. "I'm sorry," he survived. The assassin whispered. The robed figure said nothing for a moment, then slowly reached out and touched their shoulder. "Do not worry," the voice said calmly. "If he speaks tomorrow, the court will see him as a hero." The assassin looked up, confused. "Isn't that what we want to stop?" "No," the voice replied. "Now we want the human alive. Because heroes," he said with a chilling smile, "make excellent tools." The sun had not yet risen, but the grand court was already alive. Guards moved like shadows across the polished halls. Messengers hurried past with sealed scrolls, and advisors argued in hushed voices. Tension buzzed through the air like static. Jake stood at the edge of a private balcony. Staring down at the city below, he wasn't nervous. Not the way most people would be before speaking to 2 alien clans on the edge of war. He was thinking, watching, calculating something didn't add up. Someone had tried to kill him, and no one had asked why. No formal investigation, no arrests. Just silence and fake smiles from the royal staff. It felt like walking through a room filled with poison gas. He could smile, but every breath was dangerous. Vera entered the chamber. Without knocking, holding a small device in her hand. "Security for your speech is doubled," she said, then paused. "But don't trust the ones in gold armor." Jake raised an eyebrow. "That's the king's guard," he said. Vera looked him in the eyes. "I know," she said quietly. Jake followed her into a narrow hall beneath the court, a place she said was rarely used. The walls were old, cracked, lined with old weapons and banners of forgotten wars. They stopped in front of a thick metal door. "What is this?" Jake asked. Vera tapped the control panel. "It's a vault," she replied. and inside is something no human has ever seen. The door opened slowly. Hissing, inside was a table, and on it, stacks of paper not digital, not encrypted. Just old-fashioned ink and pages. Jake picked up one and began to read, his heart slowing as the words registered. It was a battle plan. Not just for the coming war between the Ulker and the Draven, but for what came after invasion routes too. Earth timelines, strategies, and even lists of cities to strike first. Jake dropped the paper. They never wanted peace, he whispered. Vera nodded, her face pale. They just wanted time. A low noise echoed through the hallway. Like metal shifting under pressure, Vera instantly drew her blade. Stepping between Jake and the door, footsteps approached, slow and heavy. Not guards, not friendly. Jake looked around, then spotted a narrow escape shaft on the left wall. Go. He whispered to her. I'll hold them, but she shook her head. No, you're the only voice they'll listen to today. He grabbed the papers, stuffed them inside his jacket, and jumped into the shaft without a word. Vera turned back toward the sound, her blade rising just as figures entered the room. Jake tumbled into a dark storage chamber far below. Bruised, but alive, he pulled the papers back out, hands shaking. This wasn't just politics anymore. This was a setup. Someone wanted war to look inevitable. And someone in the court, maybe even the king, was playing both sides. Jake knew one thing for sure. If he stepped on that stage today with just pretty words, it would be the last thing he ever said. But if he spoke with proof in hand, he might start a war or stop it forever in the high court above. The robed figure stood beside the throne and smiled. The king hadn't noticed the missing papers yet, but the clock was ticking. And the human was no longer just a guest. He was a threat. And threats to be silenced. The royal court chamber filled with hundreds of eyes. Every noble, warlord, and clan leader had gathered. 2 armies stood outside the palace, 1 Ulker, 1 Draven, each ready to strike at a single command. And in the center of it all stood a human. Jake Monroe stepped forward, his clothes dusty, torn slightly from crawling through the hidden shaft. No one knew where he had been that morning, not even Vera, but he walked tall, calm. As if the fate of 2 alien races wasn't balanced on his next words, the king raised a hand, silencing. The room you may speak, human, he said. But know this, a false word here is death. Jake nodded slowly. He didn't begin with a speech. He began by pulling the stolen papers from his jacket and tossing them on the floor in front of the throne. The crowd gasped. What is this? A warlord snarled, stepping forward. Jake's voice was sharp and steady. Plans, he said. Plans written by someone inside your palace. Invasion maps, he added. Targeting Earth, the king stood, his eyes locked on the pages. Silence fell again. But it wasn't peaceful, it was the heavy silence before a storm. 1 noble stepped forward, face red with rage. This is a lie, a human trick. Jake shook his head. I found these hidden in a sealed vault, he said. Ask your own guard. She led me there. Vera stepped forward, standing beside him without fear. Several nobles drew weapons. But no one moved yet. The court was split half. Wanted to believe him, half wanted his head. Jake took a deep breath, then looked toward the Ulker general. A massive alien with battle scars across his face. You believe humans are weak, Jake said. But I'm standing here without an army, without armor. He pointed to the general. You want proof that peace is stronger than war? Then face me, he challenged. In your trial of truth. Gasps echoed through the court. Even Vera flinched. The trial of truth was no game, it was a brutal tradition used to test honor, a mental and physical ordeal that left most screaming. Or broken. The general narrowed his eyes. You would die, he said. Maybe, Jake replied. But if I survive, both armies must stand down by your own law. The king hesitated, then nodded once. "Let it be done," he declared. An ancient platform rose from the center of the chamber. Covered in glowing red runes, Jake stepped onto it without flinching, and so did the general. 2 cables were placed on their heads' neural links. Ancient tech, dangerous and raw, whilst in so's. In an instant, their minds were joined, and the trial began. Jake found himself falling memories crashing through him like waves. He saw alien wars, death, betrayal, the pain of the Ulker people. Their lost children, burned homes. But he also forced his own memories forward Earth's wars. The day his brother died in a firestorm, the screaming of mothers with no more. Sons, the general's breath hitched. He staggered, his knees trembling. Jake held on, teeth clenched, pushing harder. War doesn't make you strong. He whispered through the link, living through it. That's the hard part. Suddenly, the trial ended, the platform dimmed. Both men dropped to their knees, gasping. But the Ulker general looked up first and he wept. He turned to the court and dropped his weapon. "No more," he said. "This human speaks truth." Weapons lowered across the court. One by one, voices began to murmur. The Draven emissaries stepped forward, nodding slowly. "If Ulker choose peace, so do we." Jake stood, barely able to breathe. But inside, he knew this wasn't victory. This was only the moment before the real test. Because peace might begin here, but not everyone in the shadows wanted it to last. And somewhere deep below the palace, a hidden figure whispered into a comlink, "Begin the next phase." They said, "The human won the trial. Now make him disappear." They cheered for him, but Jake didn't feel like a hero. His body trembled with exhaustion, and his head pounded from the trial's aftershock. The court was in chaos, some nobles applauding, others storming out, and the king watching it all. With unreadable eyes, Jake had stopped the war with words and memories. But not everyone welcomed peace. He barely made it to his chamber before collapsing. Vera sat beside him, handing him water, her fingers brushing his as she spoke softly. "You survived something even our own warriors fear," she said. "They'll remember you now." Jake gave her a weak smile. "I didn't come to be remembered," he said. "I came to stop the killing." But outside the chamber door, someone listened. A figure cloaked in ceremonial robes, carrying no weapon, but dangerous nonetheless. They turned and whispered to a hidden device. "The crowd believes in him now," the voice said. "We must move before the reward is declared." That evening, the grand court gathered again. The king stood from his throne, silent until the room hushed like a dying fire. For the first time in generations, he said, "There is no war today." He turned to Jake, who stood beneath the alien banners. For that, the king continued, "You may ask for any reward, title, land, wealth, even bloodline." The crowd stirred, some in awe, others in disbelief. A human offered royal privilege. Unthinkable, Jake stepped forward slowly, his voice calm but strong. "I want none of those," he said. "I want your children to be taught the cost of war. I want a school built not just for your people, but for every race that was ready to destroy each other." Gasps broke across the chamber. Not of anger, but of something deeper. Respect, but not all hearts turned so easily as the king nodded in approval. Someone in the upper balcony pulled a small glass sphere from their robe. Inside it, a swirling black mist pulsed softly, waiting to be unleashed. Vera spotted the movement first. She didn't hesitate. She shouted and shoved Jake to the ground just as the sphere was thrown. It shattered against the wall behind him, and the mist exploded outward like a wave of hungry shadows. Screaming erupted as alien nobles stumbled and clawed their way out of the chamber. The black mist wasn't smoke. Was memory poison, forbidden. Tech from the warriors, anyone who breathed it too long would lose their identity, their past, even their loyalty. Jake looked up, dazed. Vera was choking, her eyes going dark. He dragged her toward the exit with all the strength he had left. The guards hesitated. They didn't know whether to protect the king or the human. But then the king stood and shouted, "Protect the human, save the peace." It was the first time in recorded history that a Xerthian king had ordered his men to save an outsider before the throne, and the court would never forget it. Outside, as healers arrived and Vera was treated, Jake stood under the alien stars, his face bruised, his hands shaking, but his eyes locked on the smoking court doors behind him. Someone had tried to erase him from history literally. Someone powerful and still hiding in plain sight. But now, Jake was more than a guest. He was a symbol, and symbols were harder to kill. In the shadows of the eastern wing, the same robed figure watched with narrowed eyes. Plan failed, came a voice through the device. The figure didn't respond immediately, then whispered, "Then we must offer him something he can't refuse." Jake hadn't slept. The healers had stabilized Vera, but she hadn't woken up yet. She lay in a sealed medical pod, her breath shallow, skin pale beneath a soft blue light outside the infirmary. The palace felt quieter than before, not peaceful, but paused, like a held breath. The explosion had shaken everyone, and the king had gone into seclusion. Rumors filled the air. Some blamed rebels. Others whispered about old ghosts of the war clans. But Jake knew better. He'd seen the hesitation in the guards' eyes, the carefully timed rescue, the coordinated silence afterward. This wasn't chaos. It was a message. A royal servant approached him in the corridor. "Dressed in silver and black, His Majesty wishes to see you," the servant said, bowing low. Jake followed silently, heart heavy, mind racing. He wasn't just walking into a throne room now. He was walking into a den of vipers, wearing gold and titles. But the king's chamber was not what Jake expected. Gone were the guards, the court, the banners. The king sat alone at a long stone table. No crown, just his deep gray robes and tired eyes. "You've done more in a week than our council has in a century," the king said, his voice lower than usual. "But peace comes at a cost." Jake waited, watching. "And I wonder," the king continued, "if you're ready to pay it." Before Jake could answer, the king pressed a hidden switch, and a section of the wall opened. Inside was a secret chamber glowing with soft white light. And in the center stood a chair ornate, ancient, clearly ceremonial. "This," said the king, "is the peace throne." Jake blinked. "What is this?" he asked quietly. The king stood beside it, hands behind his back. "Long ago, this throne was meant for a unifier, someone neither Alker nor Draven, someone above blood and banners. We never found such a person," he said with a bitter smile. "Until now." Jake stepped back. "You want me to rule?" he asked. "I came to stop a war, not lead your empire." The king nodded slowly. "Exactly," he said. "And that's why they might accept you." Behind them, a hidden door slid open. Jake turned quickly. 3 robed figures entered, their faces hidden by veils. The central figure spoke, voice calm and soft like velvet. "We represent the balance order," they said. "We have guided this court through every war, every peace. You stopped this one," the figure continued, "and for that, you've earned a choice." They extended a hand within it, a sealed scroll marked with a blood-red emblem. "If you sign," they said, "you will become the neutral king," a title without bloodline, but with full power to enforce peace. Jake stared at the scroll. "Why me?" he asked. The figure's answer was simple. "Because they trust you more than they trust each other." Silence filled the room, heavy and sharp. Jake looked down at his hands, still marked by the burns of the trial. He remembered Earth, burning. Divided, he remembered the screaming, the dust, the day peace finally came at home. He stepped forward, slowly reaching for the scroll. Then he paused. "If I take this," he said, Who do I answer to? The robed figure tilted their head. No one, they said. That's why it's dangerous. Jake didn't smile, but something shifted in his eyes. Danger had never stopped him before. Jake didn't sign right away. He stared at the scroll for a long time, his hand hovering over the ink. It wasn't fear holding him back. It was understanding. Peace wasn't a ribbon to tie around a war. It was a living thing, fragile, always hunted outside the palace. Crowds had begun to gather. Both Ulker and Draven stood shoulder to shoulder. Something that hadn't happened in over 300 years. Not out of love, but out of curiosity. They wanted to see what a human would choose. Vera awoke that morning, her breath shallow, her eyes blinking slowly. Jake was already gone, but beside her bed sat a folded cloak. Not of Earth, not of Zerthia. It bore a new symbol. One no one had ever seen before, half the Earth crest, half the Ulker-Draven seal. In the Grand Court, silence fell as the human entered. No guards flanked him, no drums played, no fanfare echoed. Just the sound of his footsteps on the stone floor. Jake held the scroll in his hand, sealed and unbroken. He walked past the king, past the nobles, past the throne itself, and instead of sitting, he placed the scroll on the table. Untouched, I will not rule. Jake said calmly, but I will lead, as long as I'm needed. I don't need a throng to speak the truth. Some nobles muttered, others whispered sharply. But one by one, they quieted, because even without the title, they knew this man had changed everything. The king stepped forward, and to the shock of all, removed his crown. He placed it not on Jake's head, but on the throne, and walked away. Let the throne be empty, the king said, until the people choose peace on their own. The moment passed like a ripple through water, not loud, not dramatic, but real. The court bowed not to Jake, but to the moment itself, to the future they didn't expect to exist, but now had no choice but to honor. In the weeks that followed, Ulker and Draven schools opened their gates to Earth teachers. Former war captains became peace architects. The first council with 3 races, including humans, held its first silent vote unanimous, and in the edge of the capital, near a blooming garden that once held the ashes of fallen warriors, a new statue was built. It wasn't of Jake holding a sword or standing like a king. It was of him kneeling, helping a child from each species stand together. Below the statue, 4 words were carved, simple and eternal. He chose peace anyway. Somewhere deep in the stars, Jake watched from a new ship. Not as a hero, not as a leader, just as a human. Still moving, still believing. Still ready to stop the next war before it began.